Welcome to Aspen Leading Edge. I'm Patty Roberts from St. Mary's University School of Law, and today's guest is Corinna Lain. She is the S.D. Roberts and Sandra Moore Professor of Law at the University of Richmond School of Law in Richmond, Virginia. Welcome.
Thanks, Patty. I'm so happy to be here.
Well, I'm so happy to have you here. University of Richmond is just down the road from my alma mater at William and Mary Law School, and where I spent 2 decades in legal education. So I'm familiar with your gorgeous campus and your innovative curriculum. And why don't you start by telling us about your journey to the University of Richmond and teaching in legal education?
That's a great question to get us started. I was actually in first year constitutional law when I said, well, I could do that. Not
Wow.
knowing, of course, anything,
And
anything
common law of all things.
Yeah. Well, it was that particular professor's very first year. There is a learning curve. And I remember students actually started a petition against him, not knowing, of course, what any of that meant. I was not part of that, by the way. But it was not the best experience. And I sat there and thought, well, I could do that. And in my second year, I went to my faculty advisor and said, basically, how would I get your job? And he said, it's really super hard to get my job, my type of job, but here are the things. And I, being the little nerd, wrote them all down and just started to sort of try to check them off and to have the sort of credentials and writing experience, publishing experience that one would need. And when I was on my clerkship, I had an opportunity to go on the market. I talked to my judge, Judge Porfilio on the 10th Circuit. And I said, well, the kind of law professor I'd like to be would be somebody who has some experience so that I can tell students, well, this is what it looked like. I told him I wanted to go into criminal law. And he said to me, you need to go roll around in it. You need to go be where the people are. So do not apply to the U.S. Attorney's Office or to a federal. He said, you need to go to a local office and actually see what this looks like. And that's exactly what I did. So I can still remember the interview for that job. I was in Henrico here in Richmond, and they said, where do you see yourself 5 years from now? And I said, either here or in law teaching. So this was something that I really wanted to do. I didn't know if I could break into the market. I was starting to see how really challenging that is, but I applied nationally and I was a visitor at Richmond and had other schools making offers. And I think it was then that Richmond said, well, maybe she'd be all right. And
That often does it, right? If
I've been
somebody
here
else
ever
wants her.
since.
Yeah, if somebody else wants her, maybe she's pretty good. I'm so impressed by the intentionality with which you approached becoming a law professor from your first year. I don't think we see that happen very often. Not only the recognition that you want to do that early, but also that you then checked all the boxes, which you clearly did. And I think that it is especially impressive when I learned, at least, that you were a first generation student and you didn't have the kind of foundation upon which you might understand what a law professor's path looked like. So if you can share a little bit about how you got to law school in the first place.
Indeed. Well, I joined the Army when I was 18. I was a truck driver in the Army, actually. Started out as a 64 Charlie. They then reclassified it as an 88 Mike for any veterans out there. Yeah, I was a truck driver in the Army and I joined for the GI Bill because I am a first gen. And interestingly, the Army, I think, in some ways played into my wanting to be a law professor because it not only gave me all of the discipline and the drive and the mission-oriented focus, but for a period of time, I was the training NCO. And so I was mentoring people on remedial PT and encouraging them and saying, well, what about if you did it this way? I was going to the training out to the marksmanship training, and okay, this is a little bit of a claim to fame. For me, one of my proudest moments, I was an expert shot with the M16A1 semi-automatic rifle, which means I could,
That is a claim to fame.
it kind of what, I mean, I'm just saying, but I could hit a pop-up target from 300 feet away. That was a little 3-second target, and that's hard to do. And so, I was out there in the field talking to other soldiers and saying, you squeeze the trigger, you have to hold your breath and these sorts of things. And so I think there was this inclination to teach and mentor that was born in the Army, albeit under a completely different setting. And you're right. Because I was a first gen, I didn't even know any lawyers. I didn't know any lawyer, even my mom's divorce lawyer. I didn't know who that was. So I didn't have any lawyers in my life. When I was in the Army, I was a sergeant at this point and met a wonderful man out playing pool one night in Savannah, Georgia, and we fell in love. He was a JAG officer and I was a sergeant. So we didn't have anything to do with each other, but I think it was probably not something people loved. But we fell in love and he was from Richmond, Virginia. And
Full
when
circle, huh?
yeah, well, I'm from Montana. So
Oh, I
yes.
kind of assumed you're
Mhm.
from Virginia because all your schooling
No,
was in Virginia. Okay.
no, I had not been east of North Dakota. So when I
Oh,
joined the Army in Montana, I was like, there's a big world out there. I want a piece of it. So I met this man, and when he got out of the Army, he was a public defender in Richmond. And so he wasn't the one I married, but that inspired me. I thought I would perhaps be a public defender. I ended up being a prosecutor instead, but that's sort of how that came to be.
well, that's a great story, and I think it's hilarious that that wasn't the one that you ended up marrying. But how great that he still came into your life, and obviously for a
Mm,
reason to bring you back to the Richmond area. And I really appreciate what you said about how your judge said you have to go roll around in it. What a great image! I think I might use that. That's
mm.
really terrific. So you have been at the University of Richmond for 24 years teaching, is that correct?
Yeah, I'm in my 24th year now. So, oh, you're right. It's now 24 years because we're at the end of the year. You are
We
right.
are. We are at the end of the year. And you have accomplished some firsts and some milestones there. Do you want to share a little bit about that?
Well, I am the senior female faculty member, which someone's going to be senior, so I suppose that's not a first. But I am the first named professor, female professor, and I think I was the first associate dean of faculty development. In fact, they created the position for me, which is very sweet. I'm not sure what other first perhaps that I had, but
I think those are very impressive. I love that you're the first female chaired professor, and those are important milestones for an institution, and congratulations to you.
thank you.
So one of the things that prompted us to schedule this interview was I read about your book, your first book, Secrets of the Killing State, The Untold Story of Lethal Injection. And actually, when I read about it on LinkedIn, I immediately forwarded it to Alex Klein, one of our former faculty members, because she's a big death penalty specialist. She's now at Washington and Lee, as you know. And she said, "Oh, I know. And I know Corinna, and we've talked about this book, and I can't wait to read it," and all of that.
She's in the acknowledgments, actually.
Oh,
She sent me
fantastic.
some nice updates along the way. Mhm.
Excellent. Well, I found it interesting. It was an interesting topic to me. And then the tagline in the description of the book says lethal injection is nothing like what people think. This is its untold story.
Mhm.
So why don't we start with what prompted you to study this area of law, and then we'll go into what's in the book.
Great. So I am a death penalty scholar. I've been studying the death penalty for around 18 years now. And as far as how I came to write the book, there was a professional piece and there is a very, very personal piece. The professional piece was I was writing another death penalty article. And there was a little piece of lethal injection in there, and I couldn't find the research that I wanted to cite for it. And so I had to go hunting and finding for myself. But at the same time, I was seeing these botched executions in the papers and thinking, well, why are states so bad at this? Why are they so breathtakingly bad at something that we do to humanely put down our beloved pets, every single day? And so that's the research question that I thought would be an article. It insisted upon being a book. But as far as the book goes, I must say, I did not want to write a book. In fact, I'm a legal historian, and the project before this, I had workshopped it at a couple faculties, and those faculties all said, there's a lot stuffed in here. This really needs book length treatment. And I so did not want to write a book that I put that piece down. That piece is still down because I did not want to write a book. So I moved over. I have like two big veins of research. One is constitutional history, Supreme Court decision making. The other is the death penalty. And when I get stuck on one, I move to the other. So I put that one down, moved over to the death penalty, and here I am. And so when I was writing the lethal injection piece, I got to, I don't know, the end of part 1 or something and had 300 footnotes and said, well, I said an expletive, blank. It's a book. And I set it down. I was really mad because I did not want to write a book. And I went to AALS that year. And I don't go often to AALS. It's in early January, as you know. And I'm always tired from the holidays, and the new semester is about to start, and it just feels rushed. So I often don't go. But this year, it was January 2018, and it was in San Diego. And I had never been to San Diego, let alone San Diego in January. So it seemed like a very good time to go.
And it
But
was. I was there
right,
too. It was
right,
good. Yeah.
lovely. But law professors, the way we engage with each other is, hi, how are you? What are you working on? And so everywhere I went, what are you working on? What are you working on? What are you working on? And I felt very insecure because I had just worked 2 years on that legal history piece that I put down. And I was a year into the lethal injection piece that I was putting down. And so all of a sudden I'm like, well, in a world where it's, what have you done lately? I hadn't done much lately. And so after one particularly stressful lunch, I actually skipped the 1 o'clock session and went up to my hotel room. And I will now tell you, I'm a person of deep faith. And I call myself a free range chicken Christian because it's not so much denominational, it's just a deep faith. And I got on my knees and prayed and said, Lord, I don't want to write a book. And I don't want to write a book on lethal injection. It was much longer than that. I was talking about all the ways this would be bad for me. And then I said, if I knew this was from you, if I thought this was from you, well, that changes everything. Then it's like some honor, right? And so I said, if this is from you, Lord, please speak clearly because I'm not inclined to do it otherwise. And I don't know, I was kneeling against the bed and so the side table was right there, and I just opened the side table to see if there was like a Gideon's Bible in there, and there was. And I just flipped it open. I actually have it. I took a picture of it, and I actually have that on my bulletin board, so I will read it to you. Top left of the page, right where my eyes started. Psalm 45. My heart is overflowing with a good theme. I recite my composition concerning the king. My tongue is the pen of a ready writer.
Holy cow, Corinna.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. I did cry. I was like, wait, what? And I took a picture to remember that moment. And I walked away from that and said, well, I'm going to write a book on lethal injection. And so I did. And listen, that is just the beginning of that faith story. I actually have a shortened version of it on my author's webpage. It's the Behind the Book tab, but I have all the pictures there because it's really quite incredible. And I just feel so fortunate to have had this walk and to do this work. So
That's an amazing story. I think often, I also am a person of deep faith, and I think often that there's so much static, noise, rush, hurry that we often miss the signs or we don't hear the messages, and how wonderful that yours was so explicit and that you heard it. You heard him. So I'm curious, the death penalty in itself, you were a death penalty scholar. Why lethal injection as opposed to other kinds of death penalty?
Well, the lethal injection came with the call to write the book. I mean, I wasn't so much a lethal injection scholar. In fact, I guess I wrote a piece in 2015 that was death penalty drugs and the international moral marketplace. And so that's sort of a blend of my death penalty scholarship and my con law scholarship, which is really a court and culture type scholarship and how do extra legal norms, social political movements and currents make their way into the law. And so that was looking at that, but that was more about the drugs. That wasn't sort of head on, let me think about lethal injection. It wasn't until I started trying to write the article that I really got into lethal injection.
And what is the state of lethal injection or the death penalty nationally? How many states that do utilize the death penalty opt for lethal injection, or what general
Yeah.
percentage?
So there's 27 states that have the death penalty right now. A lot of people think, oh, the United States has the death penalty. And I'm like, barely. I mean, 27, so it's more than half, but 4 of those have governor issued a formal moratorium, so they're not executing. Another 10 are de facto abolitionist states. They've got the death penalty. It's on the books, but they haven't used it in over a decade. So there's about a dozen states that are actually executing. And among the states that have the death penalty, lethal injection is authorized in every single one of those states. In most of those states, it is the primary method of execution. And over the past 10 years, over the past decade, lethal injection has been responsible for 98% of
Oh,
all executions. So
so it
this
is
is
the
how we
primary method.
execute. Now, having said that, just in the last year, that has started to change. So this book project, by the way, it was the call to write it was January 2018. I was already a year in. So here we are, 2025. I mean, I'm 7 years. It's been that long of a journey. And so I never could have foreseen when I started writing the book that in January 2024, the state of Alabama would execute someone for the first time in the entire world by nitrogen gas, or that South Carolina would turn to the firing squad. And so we're seeing changes, and all of those come back to lethal injection and the problems with lethal injection that I'm documenting in the book.
Did I just read a headline that there was a firing squad that did not succeed?
Yes. Yeah. Well, it's not that it didn't succeed. The man died, the prisoner died, but it's really interesting. So there were 3 executioners. South Carolina did not use someone who has a blank. Utah does, but South Carolina said, nope, 3 executioners. They're each going to have a bullet. They put a target over the person's heart, and there's only 2 bullet wounds.
Oh my.
The state actually had someone saying, well, 2 bullets went in the same place, so that's why you only see 2 bullet wounds. I just, I want to say, like, read my book and then tell me if you believe anything that the state has to say. Truly, because I lay it out and I use the word deliberate misrepresentation because I like to be polite. In some other places, I quote legislators. There's one who said, we lie and lie and lie and lie. He said it 5 times. And to perpetuate this view of lethal injection as this sort of humane putting down a pet. So we could use different words, but I saw that and I saw the explanation said, you've got to be kidding me. But I'm glad you mentioned this, Patty, because one of the things I talk about in the book that I think has surprised several people is I talk about the executioners, and I talk about, not only who are we killing, but who are we creating when we ask someone else to kill as a part of their job. And even with lethal injection, I'm quoting these executioners who say, listen, by the time an execution warrant comes down, this person has lived with us for over a decade, sometimes 2, sometimes 3. And we know that they could be safely housed for the rest of their life. And here's me, this is me adding this, for millions cheaper. But in any event, but they're like, we know they could be safely housed. We get to know them as human beings. And then a death warrant comes in and we have to kill them. And what they're saying is, you can't expect us to not be damaged by that.
Yeah.
And so I talk about the trauma, and it's interesting. I did a book event a week ago, and the person said, my conversation partner said, I was ready to demonize the executioners, and I did because of all the bad things that they do. And I read about them. And then I get to the end of your book And then I'm feeling sorry for them and trying to understand just what a tragic circumstance this is in so many ways. But the reason I mention that is because what I wonder is, did one of those executioners say, I'm not doing it? I'm not doing it. And even the other two, the bullets went, I think, into the abdomen area. And I wonder if they were like, I'm not going to be the one to shoot the heart. I'm going to shoot somewhere else. But as a result, he took a very long, much longer than the state said to die.
So this reminds me of some moral injury research I did back when I
Yes.
was working in our Veterans Benefits Clinic at William and Marion. But I never thought about, I mean, moral injury, certainly we train our soldiers, they end up killing others for the sake of the country, and that they bring home these traumas. They're doing it typically of strangers, right? It's not somebody they have taken care of or lived with or befriended for 10 years. So that's a really interesting and unique perspective I am certain people don't think about.
I didn't.
I would have thought they'd bring in like the strange guy from another prison, I mean, like somebody who's a stranger to the person being killed. But anyway, so that's one of the things that obviously is, what do you call them? They're not lies, they're
Deliberate misrepresentations.
okay, deliberate misrepresentation. The book, in the description of the book, it says popular imagination, lethal injection is a slight pinch and a swift nodding off to forever sleep. Performed by well-qualified medical professionals, regulated, carefully conducted, usually a humane death. In reality, it is not one of those things. So tell us a little bit more about what your discoveries were related to lethal injection and the important messages your book conveyed.
So one of the things that I think is important for people to understand that, I'm really referring to in that little paragraph that you read is the 3-drug protocol that every state used for the first 35 years of lethal injection, and that many states, they use some version of the 3-drug protocol today. The second drug is a paralytic, and it is not only a paralytic, but it is a muscle relaxant. And so it relaxes the muscles in the face and then it freezes them that way. And so you're going to get this nice, peaceful drifting off to sleep look, no matter what is actually happening. And it works from the outside in. And so the last thing that it is paralyzing is the diaphragm, the muscle in the core. And of course, the diaphragm is the muscle that is pumping air into the lungs. And so what doctors have said is this would be like being buried alive, right? The person is taking shallower and shallower breaths as the diaphragm is becoming paralyzed. And, we see some in the autopsies are showing some distended veins. And so we know, they are trying to gasp for breath, even as onlookers say, oh, they just drifted off to sleep. Related to that, back in 2008, and this was the Supreme Court's first lethal injection case, prisoners challenged the use of the paralytic. And that litigation, they said, first, execute us like you put down pets. We want that protocol. That's what they were asking for.
Yeah, that would make sense, wouldn't it?
Right? Yeah, it would. So I talk about why didn't they do that? But in any event, they said, execute us like pets. Can we please have that death? You're treating animals better than us. We have constitutional rights. And then their backup claim was, or just don't use the paralytic. Like, what is the purpose of the paralytic? It doesn't anesthetize us. That's the first drug. It's not the drug that's bringing death by inducing cardiac arrest. That's the third drug. It's purely cosmetic. And shockingly, the state said, yeah, you're right. Now, the state used different words. What the state said was, well, it serves a purpose. The purpose is the appearance of a dignified death.
Wow.
Appearance of a dignified death. And they had the audacity to say that this was for the prisoner, and I said, well, the very fact that the prisoners are litigating to stop you from using it tells you they would much rather have what you consider an undignified death than be slowly suffocating to death. under this paralytic. The state admitted that's what the purpose is. And our Supreme Court said, yeah, that works for us. And so that is why the 3-drug protocol continues to exist today. So it's all about appearances. I honed in on that just as one example of so many. But if you're asking, or if your listeners are wondering, like, why didn't they use the 1-drug protocol that we use on pets? We know how to put down pets humanely. We know how physician-assisted suicide works. I can tell you, I talk about that in chapter 2, which is called Faux Science. And this was one of many surprises for me, was there's no science behind lethal injection. I thought, like, surely there's science behind this. It's not like some guy just made it up off the top of his head. But alas, some guy made it up off the top of his head. And he was later interviewed. This was the medical examiner of Oklahoma. He called himself famously an expert in dead bodies, but not in how to get them that way. And when he was asked, well, how did you come up with the 3-drug protocol? He said, I didn't do any research. I just thought about what might work. You wanted 2 drugs in overdose form. So if one didn't kill him, the other one did. And then the follow-up was, well, why did you add a 3rd drug? And he said, why not? I didn't do any research. Why does it matter why I chose it?
And this became the standard nationally?
Yes, ma'am. I know, right? And I must say, Patty, I wrote this book for the public. And I'm really happy that some of the reviews coming in are saying, this is a page turner and this is actually very readable. So I want to say, I wrote this for you. I wrote this for people because the courts are not protecting. But I think that good people on both sides of the aisle would read this and be flabbergasted at the findings that I'm documenting, including the fact that a guy made it up and that every other state just followed it, blindly followed it. And actually, he was asked about this, and he said, I guess they just blindly followed it. Never in my wildest flight of fancy did I think it would mushroom, balloon into what it did. And he said, I was young at the time. I thought it would just be a thing for Oklahoma.
That's pretty incredible. So yeah. I know that we could talk about a lot of the other things that you found that could make an entire book. And thank goodness.
And it did.
Yes. And thank goodness that God helped you overcome your reticence to write this and called you to do just that. Before we wrap up, I wanted to ask, what has the reaction been to the book? And is there anything about it that has surprised you?
So the reaction to the book has been really uniformly positive. As I say in the introduction, I brought the receipts. So it has 70 pages, just over 1,000 endnotes in the back, because it's pretty astounding and pretty surprising. So when you say, what has surprised you? I'm like, everything. And so, I document everything I say. And so I think if you read the book, it's hard to say, well, this isn't so. So there were a lot of things that surprised me. But on the personal side, I think there's one that I would mention in particular. And I talk about it in the epilogue. I have a very short little 3-page epilogue. And I talk about how I've been studying the death penalty for a really long time. And I've always viewed the death penalty as a series of broken promises of procedural protections. And I thought of this project when I first started it as just another in that line. I confess, I've always kept my distance, my emotional distance from the convicted capital murderers that I've been writing about all these years. After all, I'm a former prosecutor, and they are convicted capital murderers. But this project has offered and in fact insisted upon giving me a front row seat as to who these people are at the end. Like, not who they were in their worst moment, not who they were at the time of their crime, not who they were at the time of trial, but who are we actually executing? Who are they? And that is not something I studied. I wasn't studying that at all. But studying lethal injections means studying executions. And studying executions means you're going to study these people at the end. And what I saw again and again and again is that the person who committed this terrible, terrible act, they weren't there anymore. And sometimes they were this broken old man that is wheeled into the into the execution chamber in a wheelchair. These people are being propped up with medical pillows because they're on oxygen and they don't want them to choke while they're trying to kill them. I think it was Louisiana that had 2 people they were trying to execute. One died first. I see that again and again. Someone goes into hospice and the state rushes to kill them before they die on their own. So, you see that and how debasing that is. And the executioners are tapping them on the shoulder and saying, I'm sorry, I'm going to try to find a vein. I'm sorry I pricked you. It's just like so pathetic and sad. But also, these people, so many of them find redemption on death row. And they are praying to Allah or Jehovah or to Jesus as they die. There are times when they're singing a hymn with the executioners before the executioners have to kill them. And they're starting prison ministries. And so I talked in the epilogue about a guy named Brian Dorsey who, committed this murder. He gets sentenced to death. At 17 years later, he lives in the honor dorm of the prison. And he is the prison barber for over a decade. And he cuts the hair not only of all the other prisoners, but by choice, the prison guards, including the 2 wardens. And so, think about what that looked like to have a condemned capital murderer with a pair of scissors and a razor blade at the warden's neck. And
It's unimaginable. That's
it's
incredible.
unimaginable. So they wrote an op-ed saying, save him. He's not the same person. I talk about, imagine what that looked like. And the next line is, quote, Mr. Dorsey is an excellent barber and a kind and respectful man. And yet, 72 prison guards who filed a petition to the governor, the victim's family members, who also were like, yeah, don't kill him. He's not the same guy. Everybody's feeling sorry for him. That makes us feel worse. It's just so painful. 5 of the jurors, everyone's like, don't kill this guy. People do get redeemed. And the governor refused to intercede. And the guards who had tried to save his life were then forced to kill him. And they talked in that op-ed and said, and I'm quoting them, taking Dorsey's life would be especially traumatizing for many current and former prison staff members, myself included, who have come to respect and care for this exemplary inmate. And so I didn't want to study executions, but being present, something that Brian Stevenson has said is you have to be proximate. And it made me be proximate and see what we're actually doing. And not only, again, who we're killing, but who are we harming? Who are we creating by way of virtue ethics, by what we are asking people to do? And we don't want to look at the ugliness of what executions are, but that's what the death penalty is.
We have to look, right? If we're willing to do it, we have to look.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Well, I am sure that you are going to continue to have people really changing their views. I feel like you should send one to every governor who still has the death penalty, a signed complimentary copy.
It's funny that you say that because this morning I was driving into work and thinking, I really want to send one to the governor of Tennessee who's about to start up executions again. And I don't have any left. I'm going to have to re-up my supply, but it's a good idea. And I'm thinking about it. And I think I'm going to do just that, Patty. So thank you for encouraging
I
me.
think if we're going to keep doing it, we have to understand what we're doing, right? So what an important work. And I can't wait to read it myself. We did this interview before I had the chance to read it. So I'm looking forward to reading Secrets of the Killing State, the Untold Story of Lethal Injection. Just released last month. Congratulations on the publication and pulling the curtain back on this devastating procedure that continues to happen in ways that we don't understand across the country. Before we conclude, I want to ask you what I ask all my guests, and that is what your predictions are for the future of legal education in the coming decade.
Well, I left my crystal ball at home. However, I am an optimist. And despite studying the death penalty and executions, I am an optimist. And what I think is that things that are happening right now in our country will inspire young people and actually go to prove the opposite point of perhaps what they are intended to do. And they are showing how important civil liberties are, how important the rule of law is. If your government doesn't follow the rule of law, the entire thing breaks down. We all have to follow the rule of law, but the government that acts on our behalf simply must. It's a necessary condition of a civilized society that lives under a rule of law. And so my great hope and my belief is that the future of legal education is good. It is good that there will be increased appreciation for doing the important work that will help the arc of the universe bend towards justice, however slowly and in fits and starts.
Well, I share your optimism, and at least with the applications nationally up about 23% to law school, I think that there are many out there who believe just that and are ready to help protect the rule of law. So thank you so much, Corinna Lain from the University of Richmond, for talking with us about your legal education journey and your predictions for its future, but most of all, for sharing some insight into your new book, Secrets of the Killing State, The Untold Story of Lethal Injection. Best of luck
so much. Thanks so much for having me. It was an absolute delight talking with you.
Well, I enjoyed it as well. And if you enjoyed it and are listening today, I hope you will listen to other thought leaders in the Legal Academy with our other podcast episodes on your favorite podcast channel or the Aspen Leading Edge podcast page. Thank you.
Thanks.